You're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Edge-show.com. 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 The hyphen is stupid.
Edge-show.com.
If you're not into politics, this is a great episode for you. And if you're into politics, this is a great episode for you. Michael Shure is back from Israel. We'll spend a beat on that, and then we get on to the political game in Washington, which is really a highly intricate game that's now being affected by outside actions and getting into sexual allegations that have nothing to do with President Trump. They have to do with other members of Congress and the effects of turning a blind eye to those allegations. And again, we'll get into that right away in the Fast 15 with Michael Shure, which runs about 20 minutes. As always, I ask Michael, is this going to matter? Is that going to matter? Is this from the Mueller investigation going to make a difference? He will, as he always does, respond to my queries. Then we're joined by Matt Atchity, the former editor-in-chief at Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes, which has, I think, changed the game for movies and television. It's become the quick reference that most people use to evaluate whether or not they want to check out a television show or film. So in a sense, that whole world of aggregating critical opinion and audience opinion has become a part of how we decide to spend our entertainment dollar and time. Matt will talk about that. He'll also talk about the Young Turks, because he's now at the TYT network, and how much of what he did at Rotten Tomatoes is being applied in that realm. Thanks to all of you who support our show. Thanks for the comments you send us occasionally at edgewithmarkthompson@gmail.com. That's our email address. Oh, there's another email coming in right now. It says, "Dear Mark, please plug the Amazon link on the site and mention the other ways people can support and then start the show." All right, I'll do that. If you haven't yet, if you're going to shop Amazon, click on the link on our website, edge-show.com. It's the same Amazon you'd normally go to. It's just that going through our site, they give us, I think it's 0.5% of whatever you spend. We have no idea what you spend. We have no idea what you buy, but it just, at the end of the month, will come to us. It's a great way to support the show. Again, go to our website, edge-show.com. Click on anywhere it says Amazon. If you go into an episode, it'll usually say Shop Amazon or whatever. Click on that, and you're off to the races. A few of you have hit our PayPal link. It's sort of our virtual tip jar. That money stays with the podcast. All the money stays with the podcast. Of course, we pay webmasters, we pay producers, bookers, this kind of thing. Nobody makes much money, but we do like to take care of people so that they're not working for free. So that helps us defray those costs. There's also the added fact that no one would actually work for us if they were working for free. So there's that too. Finally, we appreciate your 5-star reviews on iTunes. It's so important, even a word or two. I listened to it, liked it. Loved his talk with the mafia guy, whatever your thing is, whatever episode you liked. Any few words help us in the iTunes universe, and it just helps us remain at the top of the queue when people are looking for podcasts. So any positive reviews and any 5-star reviews are appreciated. That's it. Summary, Amazon link, how you can support us. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
The advantage, it means.
Hey, look, I just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah. This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
Back from the road, he's our political analyst, a man who's forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. He is Michael Shure, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you. It's great. Oh, my God. That's the ovation you like to come home to.
It is great to have you back. You were in Israel.
I was in Israel. I was there for 5 nights. I connected twice both ways.
But they had enough oil to last 8 nights, right?
Yeah, but that's... That's exactly right. The lights were on the entire time I was there. It was fine. We had candles each and every night, Mark.
What is Israel like?
Israel, first of all, Tel Aviv. And, you can't, it's like if you go to Houston, you say, what's America like? It's not quite that because it's a smaller country. But Tel Aviv is its own city, and it is one of the best cities I've ever been to. It is multicultural, multilingual. There was a great energy in every restaurant, in every cafe. Arabs shopping at Jewish stores, Jews shopping at Arab stores, people commingling, languages from all over the world. I was just blown away by how great it was.
Well, it's interesting, particularly as you say that, as you think Israel makes headlines here
Right.
for controversies and protests.
Right. And you don't forget that, but it is not an oppressive thought all day long there. And that's one of the things you come away with visiting Israel is that and I was there for work, but I also took a little time to pleasure because I hadn't been there. I hadn't been to Tel Aviv ever, and I hadn't been to Israel in many, 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 many years. And I went with my family. It was a different kind of a trip. So, first of all, I've never felt safer in a city. I was walking by myself at 2 a.m, down every little alley and walkway, and because I was told that I could, and it is that safe there.
That's because it's a police state?
That's exactly right, Mark. Yeah, because there's a cop on every corner and a machine gun in every alleyway. No, I saw no weapons. I actually, except at the airport, didn't see soldiers walking around with weapons at
because
all.
I'd been many, many years ago, but that was the time they were bombing everything.
Right.
Bombing cafes and bombs
exactly.
going off all the time.
Right. So there was that at a certain time. Also, Jerusalem, I'm told, and I didn't get there this trip because work didn't bring me there, but it's only an hour away. But it is much more like that. It's far more on edge, heightened alert type of situation. But still, the feeling I got is that this fear and this war does not pervade everyday life. I mean, you could have been in any country in the world. If they told you were in, I don't know, a South American country that had no strife, you'd believe it. I want to add, I was also in the West Bank. I was in Ramallah, and you cross over into Ramallah, and that you also have expectations of. The headline for me out of Ramallah, when people said, what was it like? It was that it wasn't like anything. It was just the most normal place you could ever be, and you feel for these people who are basically imprisoned in their country. But these prisoners, many of them are, they're driving Mercedes, they're eating in restaurants, there's Popeyes and KFC and Burger King, and a cafe called Stars and Bucks with the same green and white logo, but it's not a Starbucks. And life sort of goes on, and it seemed very, very normal and ordinary.
Well, let me just follow up on that. You say they're prisoners there. Explain that and explain what the
because
passage is limited.
They're not allowed to leave, and so, without getting special permission to do so. Some, cancer patients, there's an exchange program, meaning that they can come over, but they will have to pay Israel for the care, the Palestinian Authority. There are all sorts of ways of getting in, but if they have to go to the airport to fly somewhere, they can't just go to the airport in Tel Aviv. They have to go out through Jordan to another airport in Amman.
But they can get out that way, yes?
They can get out on that end. They can't get out on the Israeli end.
And the reason for that was to guard against terrorism?
Exactly, yeah. And threats, and as part of the, warring between the two nations. Israel wouldn't call them a nation, and they wouldn't call Israel a nation, but the two states. And the fact that the two states are in that situation leads to this kind of, because Palestine says it's occupied territory, and Israel is the occupier, and that's their role.
But just to put a fine point on it, in Israel, where you were in Tel Aviv, I'm talking about where it's not contested in any way, there are Arabs and Jews living,
for sure, Arab
together.
Israelis that are there.
There are Arabs on the Israeli Supreme Court.
Right.
The Arabs can vote, so it's not an apartheid state on the Israeli side.
On the Israeli side. I mean, if you look at the big picture, there are reasons. There's a huge statue of Nelson Mandela in Ramallah that was put there a year ago because he is the symbol for fighting apartheid, and that's how they view their situation.
Sure,
there.
and the arguments in the West Bank, they are different than those arguments that might emerge in the Tel Aviv area.
In Tel Aviv, yes, that's true. I mean, listen, I think that I was with a colleague of mine who's an Arab Israeli, actually an Arab American, but he's an Arab Israeli also by citizenship, and he's saying that it's very complicated, and he's very critical of the Palestinians, but he also finds fault in the way that Israel handles it in terms of trying to make it better, that they're not.
Yeah, there are, that's an argument, obviously, that's been going on a while.
Yeah, right. We settled it, actually, before I left.
So I want to get back to what's going on in this country, unless there's anything else there.
No, that's, it's my slideshow from my trip.
There's a lot going on with the Russia investigation, with the president wanting to have Russia to the White House in the form of a Putin visit, now backing off on that. There's Michael Cohen and everything that's being revealed through tapes and the like. Because I mentioned Michael Cohen and the tapes, to those who are true Trumpies, the Trumpies, it again means so what? You even hear Giuliani say, hey, yeah, but, there are always people coming after you when there's a campaign going on. And, of course, you set up a separate corporation to have funds to handle these situations. I mean, it's a very kind of justify the mob
constantly.
kind of.
And he's the guy who said that Michael Cohen's a great lawyer. He's the president's lawyer. He respects him. And now he's saying he's a liar. He's a pathological liar. He's always a liar. I mean, they just say what is convenient. And why wouldn't they? Because they get away with it, because their supporters are so blind to what they're saying that they will follow along with anything they say. And that is a harsh and accurate and totally supportable criticism that I'm making. They are absolutely impenetrable with their support in almost a cult-like way.
And we've talked before on this show about the fact that while those who are not Trump supporters, they're looking for a gotcha or a series of gotchas in the Mueller investigation, or maybe in other news that's breaking, but a lot of hope is put in the Mueller investigation.
Right.
There isn't necessarily going to be a gotcha, is what I always say, precisely for the reason that you suggest. And what I'm really getting at is, tell us again, at the end of this Mueller investigation, this guy's not a prosecutor. He can push some of these legal things onto other jurisdictions.
Right.
But he
can make recommendations for prosecution.
But those recommendations can be put right in the circular file.
They could be. Once they're public, it will be very difficult. And that was what Republicans had a hard time with from the very beginning with this, is calling him a special counsel versus a special prosecutor. His office can't prosecute, but his office can make recommendations. And there is usually at this point, because of the reach of this office, it's unlikely that any jurisdiction would not follow through on this. I mean, he's impaneled grand juries, so once that comes down, he can, they can act, and those prosecutors will. I do think if he finds something, it will be prosecuted. Whether or not and how it's prosecuted may not matter. And it also, I mean, people are expecting it's not going to be about the president necessarily. It might be people who supported the president. But if the president was part of it, then it becomes Congress's job to correct that in whatever way. And again, this is totally speculative. That an investigation may find very little. We may have gotten all we're going to get. But the point is that what you're saying is true, is that it gets down to the end, then what?
More and more of the money trail associated with Donald Trump and his people is being exposed.
Right. And, that's what the people who are guessing, who know Mueller well, are saying that they're really after, is this is a follow the money thing. And the follow the money will prove Russian attempts to influence and Trump knowledge of same.
Jim Jordan, tell everybody who
Jim Jordan is. He's a six-term congressman from Ohio.
And he wants to be the next speaker, right?
He wants to be the next speaker now. He started the Freedom Caucus, this incredibly conservative caucus within the Republican conference that has really impacted. They have a big voice in the House, and they have a big voice among Republicans especially. As a matter of fact, they were the ones who said that they were not going to stand for Kevin McCarthy being Speaker when John Boehner resigned. Part of John Boehner's problems as Speaker came from the fact that he was never able to really appeal to them. They never liked his leadership. They made compromises in order to approve Paul Ryan as Speaker. They're not going to next time just let Kevin McCarthy, who is the Speaker heir apparent, be Speaker again. Now Jordan's running. Part of this is because Jordan himself is now under great scrutiny for a scandal involving the Ohio State wrestling team, where he was once assistant coach, and a series of sexual harassment claims and pedophilia against someone on the staff of the wrestling team.
Yeah, medical doctor.
Many people think that Jordan knew about it. Some have said that he did not know about it, but most have said that he knew, he had to have known or did know directly. He is, of course, denied ever knowing these things. A little piece of interesting political history is that the last Speaker of the House who was a wrestling coach is Dennis Hastert. And Dennis Hastert went to jail for inappropriate relationships with young boys and covering them up and paying people off for it. And now you have another potential Speaker. So he wants to run for Speaker probably to distract people away from his case, also because he wants to be Speaker and he wants a real conservative to be Speaker of his party. That's where they want to take it. He and Mark Meadows of the Freedom Caucus are the two congressmen who put forward legislation to impeach Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General who's overseeing the Mueller investigation.
I want to come back to that because that was clearly a political thing, and we want to come back to it just in a second. But first I want to stay with the allegations on history at Ohio State.
Right.
There's 7 wrestlers who came forward now, and said, look, this was common knowledge what was going on. He knew about it. There have been complaints to him, and he did nothing.
Right.
Yet he seems almost in a Trumpian way to be bulletproof on
Well,
this.
I mean, yes, not yet. I mean, he's going to have to answer for it. I mean, he's certainly going to be called to be a witness. He's going to be deposed, all of that. I mean, these are serious allegations. What he's trying to do is power through them right now. And his politics, it's the right time for his politics to actually be talking because of what's going on with the Mueller investigation. There are people that are very sympathetic to Jordan's stance on that. That's why I put them together.
He wants to end it, of course.
He wants to end it, and he of course wants it to go away, and he wants the focus to be on him wanting to be Speaker. A few things have to happen. One is the Republicans have to hold on to the House. They need 218 votes to hold the House. He's got to win the majority of the Republicans. Seems very unlikely that the Republicans are going to defer to the Freedom Caucus. They're now tired of the Freedom Caucus.
And they go on a recess, right? Aren't they going?
They're going on the August recess.
So all this stuff is going to kind of cool out.
It will, but the allegations,
they're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere. I mean, that's going to be on his back for a while. And, I'm sure Republicans in that district are actually also wondering about the viability of his candidacy. And Democrats are probably going to, sample to see how spending a little bit of money in that district, what that does to their candidate there. So I think it'll be a long year for Jim Jordan, and I don't think it's going to end with the speakership or begin next year with the speakership.
Well, Vice President Pence believes him and said that he's a man of faith and that he's a man of integrity and that he believes him.
So man of faith, all you have to be is a man of faith, and you are exonerated from all crimes.
Now let's go to the Rod Rosenstein thing. The very man you're talking about, Jim Jordan, introduces these articles of impeachment, and these articles of impeachment can't stick.
Right. They've only gotten 11 people to sign on to this. It was my theory that the Democrats should have all signed on to it and get the Republicans to vote on it. Because why Republicans and why Speaker Ryan has said that he sees no merit to this and doesn't want to bring it to the floor and doesn't think it'll win and doesn't support it and thinks that Rosenstein's been good is because it would hurt the Republican brand if they seem to undo and hide what is going on with the White House and with this investigation. And their undoing of it seems totally dogmatic rather than on the merits here. But if the Democrats all said, yeah, let's bring it to a vote. We support this. Let's bring it to a vote. Doesn't mean they have to vote for it when it gets down there. But what it does is it forces it to the floor. And as a privilege resolution, which it is, it would go right to the floor. And if they vote on it, then you have to get Republicans to vote on whether or not they think this should end. And that's a tough election year vote for them to take. It's a risk to call the bluff, though, the Republicans, because what they could do if the Democrats start playing games is say, all right, screw it, let's impeach the guy, right? And so that's why it's risky, but it would be a good political move to do, and I don't think they would impeach him. But again, that's a gamble.
These days, I think the Republicans can get away with an awful lot.
Yeah.
Mostly because they lockstep and defend, unlike the Democrats who scatter and eat their own. It's weird to try to predict what sticks these days.
Well, that's true. It is weird. And I'm going to challenge one thing you said about Democrats scattering and undoing things. And the Democrats, they've had a very tight ship, an incredibly tight ship. This is the best job that Nancy Pelosi has done as minority leader in all of her time in leadership. I believe this is the best she has done because she has kept that caucus tight together and against the president and a lot of his legislation. There's only so much you can do when you are in the minority. And when you are in the minority and you are a splintered minority, it becomes devastating. Well, they are not a splintered minority. They're a strong minority. And let me just finish because it's not just there. It's ideologically. They are sort of, the Democrats are having their problems. I would say it's not a problem. It's just they're going through some growing pains with progressives and how to keep the party together. But they're doing it, as opposed to Republicans who you see fracturing over the things like the Freedom Caucus and divisions within their party.
Fair enough. I guess you addressed, in a sense, what I was going to follow up with, which is the progressive influence and the progressive pressure that the Democrats, mainstream Democrats, are feeling. Obviously, the progressive message, there are parts of it that resonate with a voting public that's not hearing it from mainstream Democrats.
Right, that's true. But, I also don't want to overstate that. The progressives have gotten lambasted this year with the exception of one great victory in New York, which was inspiring and perhaps will be contagious.
But you also explained explained it or contextualized that on this show by saying there were some demographics that played very much toward that victory.
Absolutely there were. And they're going to fight that. I mean, the Ocasio-Cortez herself has said, we didn't win from demographics. And I should underline and underscore, she worked her ass off to win that district. She was old-fashioned politics, door to door, knocking on doors, but it was more favorable for her politics at that time than it was for Joe Crowley's. And even though that was a surprise to a lot of people, including me, that she won, when you look at everything that combined for her win, including her, and most above all her, it was an impressive and surprising victory. That's not going to play everywhere, but it's going to play in some places, and it's certainly getting amplified because of her victory, and that's important. But it's important, too, that the Democrats are adopting some of those. Other Democrats are adopting some of those tenets of her race and her victory and saying that they are for things like, affordable health care, Medicare for all, things like that, college education, and all of that she was espousing. I think that's important. The Democrats are adopting it rather than rejecting it. And Nancy Pelosi is also saying to people who are running, if you need to run against me, say you're not going to vote for me for Speaker. Don't vote for me for Speaker. Let's win the House. And that is a unity that the Republicans don't have on the other side.
One of the things that the Republicans are pushing is the overhaul of the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act has worked to rehabilitate a number of different species that were on the brink of extinction. And, of course, a number of species have gone extinct, many, since the Endangered Species Act was enacted, which is 45 years ago. In fact, I recommend a documentary called Racing Extinction, which really gives you a sense of the global threat that these various environmental hazards and threats pose to many species around the world. But anyway, we can talk about the Endangered Species Act maybe another time. But what I wanted to mention was something that's sort of symptomatic of this administration, and that is there are a number of bills being brought up to defeat the Endangered Species Act, to defeat this act that has brought back humpback whales, bald eagle, etc. But they all have to do with money. Even the most generous or considerate bill, even the bills that would consider the environmental hazards say, yeah, but we got to put a price tag on the extinction and on the damage to the species. It seems as though more and more, from an environmental standpoint, it's about money. And we find out from Zinke in some of these released interior memos that they really just want to sell off the bulk of federal parklands.
Well, here's what this is. This is on-brand politics. This is us versus them politics. Even if it is distasteful, what it does is it shows to Republicans and Republican voters, look at those liberals. All they want to do is spend money on animals. We don't want your tax dollars going to animals. It's not that they're people who, and it's hard to make this argument, not that they're people that want to obliterate the humpback whale, but they care about their politics. And to paint the other side that we're fighting these crazy liberals goes a long way for their brand, unfortunately, and that's the sad part of this. But if it comes down to money, they could say it comes down to money because that's the easy place to go with it. Your tax dollars being wasted on a whale, wouldn't you rather have that be in your pocket? That type of, distillation is what they're trying to play on. It's not true, it's inaccurate, and it's immoral, but that's the way that their politics work for them and have.
Just on your point about money, and then we'll finish up. Because of the tax cuts and the corporate tax cuts, the corporate tax revenue that this country is receiving is falling like a stone.
Yeah.
It's dropping like a rock. It's sinking like a stone.
One more. Give me one more.
It's my ears are popping.
Right, yeah.
So it's odd to have this party, which is all about money, having defeated such a huge source of revenue for the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Which is that corporate tax revenue.
And the corporate tax revenue is, that's why they speak out of both sides of their mouth on these issues. But they are still motivated by appealing to the same people.
Sure. And just to remind everybody, the corporate tax rate dropped from 35% to 21%. That's huge. And even this White House is admitting that the corporate tax revenues are much lower than expected, than all projections had indicated.
Right.
So that's an odd admission.
To have this White House admit anything, right? I mean, they wouldn't admit that Barack Obama had more people at his inauguration with photos side by side. That corporate tax rate is sinking, though.
The corporate tax rate is dropping like Facebook stock dropped
Right,
on
yeah.
that one
Well,
day.
let's hope it doesn't drop that much.
I wanted to ask you about maybe we'll take it into the press next time, because the barring of the CNN reporter from the...
Yeah, we should talk
I thought
about
that was really... I'm really disturbed by things that limit information, and this administration is really committed to limiting information. They've wiped clean a bunch of government websites that are associated with the environment, with abuse of animals, with science from NOAA, and it goes on and on.
Right. Well, the bottom line was progress was made. When Jim Acosta of CNN was told that he couldn't ask a question at a press conference, John Roberts went ahead and asked his, right? Since that, when Caitlin Collins was told she couldn't go, you had Fox and ABC and CBS and NBC and Knight Ridder and everybody criticizing it. So they were en masse critical of what happened. And Bill Shine, who is now lead communications person at the White House and the former president of Fox News, it's important that they learned in about a week and a half to stick together. And I think that's the silver lining of all of what happened at the White House.
Michael, welcome back. What do you bring back when you come back from these 5-day trips? You've got a son. Do you bring him back something?
I don't bring. I travel so much. I would go broke bringing things back for him. He doesn't get excited. He gets excited about bobblehead dolls because he collects them. So I get those when I go to certain places.
A Netanyahu bobblehead doll.
A BB head doll.
I actually would be excited to get one of those.
I'm sure you would. I couldn't find one.
I'll put it next to my Trump doll.
I looked a little bit, couldn't find it, and that's so Owen didn't get anything as far as I can think of. No. And I bring myself back an espresso cup.
I love Michael Shore, and I say to you, thanks, Michael Shore.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Come on, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Shore, everybody.
If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
Get more of The Edge on Stitcher and iTunes, or go to our website, edge-show.com.
And now the former editor-in-chief at Rotten Tomatoes, Matt Atchity, talks movies and the culture of entertainment. Welcome, Matt Atchity, the former editor-in-chief at Rotten Tomatoes, now programmer at the Young Turks network. Hi, Matt.
Hello.
And J. Elvis Weinstein is here. Josh.
Hi.
Josh from Mystery Science Theater 3000, the original voice of Servo, and a documentary filmmaker himself, Matt. You may not be aware of that. Our own Josh.
How could you be?
Well, they're out there.
Yeah, I got one on Amazon Prime. I Need You to Kill. Please go watch it.
Yeah. Josh is not in a hard sell mode on his projects, Matt.
Watch it or don't.
Yeah. Matt Atchity, Rotten Tomatoes, you were there for the sort of the birthing of this beast. Rotten Tomatoes.
Sort of. I may or may not take credit for making it the monster it is now.
A tomato birth is an ugly visual, by the way.
Has it ruined the movies, Matt?
No.
When people say, Rotten Tomatoes has ruined the movies.
You know what? Rotten Tomatoes doesn't do anything to ruin the movies that the filmmakers themselves and the business are not trying to do already.
They come pre-ruined.
That rap comes from, because they look at the tomato meter and they go, it only got a 52, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who complain. Even you'll see Scorsese talk about, people used to read film criticism and now they just look at a number. Like, okay, sure. Not like there was some great heyday of people following Andrew Saris and Pauline Kael and really, really getting into their debates. I look at Rotten Tomatoes as it's a great way to get a quick temperature rating on what the critics are saying about any particular movie. Hollywood gets mad because they can't hide the bad news so quickly, right? Like there used to be a time, 20, 30 years ago, you could open a movie big on a weekend and probably get a couple of weekends out of it because the news didn't travel that fast that it was that bad. But in this age of communication, this age of information that we're in, the news about a movie not being good breaks real quick. And there's an alternate universe in which Rotten Tomatoes never existed, and all the complaints that you hear about Rotten Tomatoes ruining movies and the tomato meter being terrible for movies is exactly the same criticism about Twitter, because people would go see a movie and they'd complain about it and word travels fast and, you mean we can't hide this turd from everyone?
Right, because how often do you disagree with a critic who doesn't like a movie? I mean, for me at least, when I disagree 90% of the time, it's because they gave it a good review and they shouldn't have.
And you really began to feel in the old days, pre-Rotten Tomatoes, that a lot of these critics must be in the bag with the studios or something, because they tend to varnish a lot of the bad movies.
Right.
Well, some of them, right? Like you would get early reviews or early quotes from people who had gone and done, like what I have discovered is the critics that go and do double duty on the junkets, right? The ones who you'll go and see the movie early. And Gray taught me this, Gray Drake, who I worked with for a long time at Rotten Tomatoes. It would get hard for her to review a movie because she was going to go interview that cast. And it's not that she wanted to be soft. It's that she was going into that movie looking for things to connect with them about. So going to it more open and, sure, a little bit more forgiving, but maybe that's a more diplomatic way of saying, now look, are there people in the bag? Probably. Yeah, I mean, I'm not that naive.
Well, and I've met, what's probably less the case now, like the local news guys who just made a life out of being on these junkets,
and that's okay.
And yeah,
right. And these junkets, they fly you all over the world now. The studio will fly you to London for the opening of Mission Impossible film, or when I say the opening, I mean to the ramp up to the opening.
Right, or we'll do a set visit. We'll fly you to Hawaii for a set visit for Rampage or something.
It's hard not to get drunk enough on that stuff that you're kind of soft on the review, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I hear what you're saying. But what Rotten Tomatoes does takes out all of that, and you just see an aggregation of all of these different opinions, right?
Right.
I mean, that's really what you guys did. It was
for any given movie, there's, at any given time, there's probably 300 or 400 active critics and outlets that are reviewing the bigger movies. And so the idea was just mark each review up or down, thumbs up, thumbs down, and the tomato meter is simply a percentage of how many people liked the movie, right? It's not an average, it's not some hidden number, it's basically, if a movie's at 80%, that means 8 out of 10 critics liked it. It's that simple.
And what makes, what's the barrier for top critic?
It's all over the place. And having not been there for a year, I don't know what it is right now. When I was there, we were looking for either somebody who had been working at one of the top 10 outlets, like one of the bigger broadcast or print or online outlets, or it was somebody that we thought was particularly important. So there was a little bit of
arbitrary.
Subjective.
Okay,
yeah.
Subjective's nicer. Arbitrary is.
But I think subjective is what it was, actually. They were deciding as opposed to just grabbing anybody. But it was a startup, Rotten Tomatoes.
It was a startup. I got there 10 years after it had started. So it was a startup by a couple of guys who had been working on at a design company. And the story that this guy Sen would tell, he was a big fan of Jet Li and Jackie Chan, and of all movies, one of the Rush Hour movies, I think maybe Rush Hour 2 kind of inspired the site because he was looking for, I wonder what everybody's saying about this particular movie, and had this thought like, someone should put all these reviews in one place. Ding! And built the site, and then the site was bought by IGN, which was this up-and-coming network that wanted to expand their audience, and then IGN got bought by Fox. So that was I came in right before the 10-year anniversaries. I was there. We were owned by Fox, and then Fox sold us off to Flixster, which was another startup. So we were part of the 20th Century Fox for about a couple of years while I was there. We got sold to Flixster. Flixster then got acquired by Warner Brothers, and then Warner Brothers sold Flixster and Rotten Tomatoes off to NBC Universal.
Wow. Okay, so a few questions, but the first is there's never a point like a crisis of creativity where you guys go, or even in the early stages before you were there, where they were saying, well, we don't want to sell out to Fox because we're critics of Fox movies and this sort of thing. Or it was just like, no, this is a service and it's going to exist the same way even if it's owned by Fox.
Right, the data is the same, presumably.
Well, so that's exactly it, Josh, is that it's all transparent, right? It's the thing is, all of the reviews that are listed on a given movie page, they're marked fresh or rotten. And in a lot of cases, there was a list that we kept internally that, this critic has told us every time they mark a movie 3 stars out of 5, call that fresh. It might be a different threshold for another critic, because it varies from critic to critic, right? Somebody might consider 3 out of 5 fresh. Some of them might consider rotten. Sometimes it might be somebody doesn't give a score, like the trades. The trades don't give scores so much, so there's a lot of parsing out. And in a lot of cases, I would have the editors reach out to that critic, and then you get the invariable complaint like, well, why does it have to be one or the other? Alonzo Duraldi always brings that up with me. He's always like, why can't you just do one in the middle? And when I finally got tired of him asking about that, I said, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask you to take a stand on a movie, which I kind of had to say because I was drinking the Kool-Aid or the tomato juice as it was. But all of that is marked there on the link page. page, right? We link to all those reviews. It's all marked. And so sometimes we'd hear on Twitter or on our social pages, hey, I think you guys marked this movie wrong. And we'd take a look, or a critic might say, hey, you marked this the wrong way. And so we'd fix it. But it's all transparent. So all that to say, I couldn't really move the score if I wanted to, right? I mean, I always joke meeting with a publicist like, it's $10,000 a point, no problem. But I really couldn't actually make the change, right? Because it's too transparent.
It is a reporting service.
It's a reporting service, right? Like, you want a better score? Make a better movie.
So it really doesn't matter who owns you then, because it really is just the technology exists to aggregate the numbers.
It doesn't really matter unless you wanted to get really subtle and really conspiratorial about it. Could you be specifically selective about the critics that you allow to look? You can juice the score by being very selective about what reviews you put on a movie, right? Now, there is a public list of all of the outlets and all of the individual reviewers that are eligible for inclusion, and the staff there puts every effort into making sure that if somebody on one of those lists reviews a movie, it'll end up on the site, right? And there's a lot of critics who add their reviews themselves because they need the traffic, right? The way to think about that is the value that an individual critic places on being part of the Rotten Tomatoes score is directly linked to how likely they are to be willing to add their own reviews, right? So like Ken Turan at the LA Times, great guy, nice guy. We would talk to him all the time. He's not going to put his own reviews up. He doesn't really care, right? But somebody...
You're saying he's so well established.
He's well established. But somebody who really needs the traffic, or one of the outlets that really needs, that gets the prestige out of being on it, they'll add their own reviews.
So you are hopeful that more reviewers will come onto the scene, or not?
Well,
you always want more, right?
You kind of always want and no.
It dilutes the value of it.
That starts to get thorny, right? And so at an individual movie level, it's really difficult because the audience watches, right, and the fans watch, and they get real invested, and so, which is great, because going back to your point, Mark, about a studio being able to move things around. They can't, because it's too transparent. It's too just out there, right? There is no ability to do that. Now, where you could start doing it is you could start getting selective about what critics you allow to have in the system, right? Because that was one of the arguments we'd have, like, we don't, this guy, we don't agree with his politics. I'm like, I don't care, right? We shouldn't care, right? If we think that this person has really good logical points and has an insight and a point of view about a movie, then we should include them. Now, where I had noticed towards the end of my tenure there, and it's a thing that honestly, and I know, I'll probably get blowback from the staff on this, the demographic of the tomato meter, and this is not news, they know this, the demographic of the people on there is overwhelmingly older white dudes. Overwhelmingly. And it's a problem. It's a real problem, because this is a thing that this news first broke 3.5 years ago. Meryl Streep coming out, doing the press tour around Suffragette, said, I don't like this. Basically, like, I've counted on Rotten Tomatoes, and their critics are only, at best, I think she said 30% female and 70% male. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. Right. And now part of that was on us, because there's a few reasons that went into this. One is we hadn't really been paying attention. Right. It wasn't, that wasn't a thing. And honestly, I'll tell you, it's a little bit of the bias of the guy, at the point that we made criteria for inclusion, because I got there and there weren't really criteria for inclusion on the site. It was basically like, oh, you'd have to ask. Right. So we set out, okay, what's it going to take? What gets you? What are we looking for? Let's define what a professional critic is, right? What we think we're looking for. But it was 3 or 4 guys and me, right? And one of the things we said is we're looking for somebody who publishes this often and has, because reviews end up, there's 2 levels of inclusion. One is you're an individual critic, right? Somebody like...
You could have your own website or something.
Right. Or somebody, for instance, if Ken Turan decides that he's going to leave the LA Times, or what's his name at the Wall Street Journal? The writer for the Wall Street Journal, his name's escaping me. Yeah, right. I've now infected you. Pulitzer Prize winning film critic, right? should he decide that he's going to leave the Wall Street Journal and do his own thing, they'll make him, if they haven't already, an individual contributor because that's an important voice, right? Ebert was a great example, right? If Ebert had left the Sun-Times, we would always pick up Ebert's reviews no matter where he went because he's Roger Ebert. There's some people that just, like, it's almost like Hall of Famer.
When you still, and they would still carry his Ebert.com reviews.
Right.
You're talking about Joe Morgenstern.
I'm talking about Joe Morgenstern, right? So let's say Morgenstern decides to leave the Wall Street Journal, and he's only really ever going to review a movie once every couple of months. Malton's a great example, right? Like Leonard hasn't been reviewing for Entertainment Tonight for years, right? But how do you not include Leonard Maltin? And basically, and I've said to Leonard, who shares a birthday with me, by the way, I've said to Leonard, because I've met him a bunch of times, because he's super friendly, he's a great guy, and he's very approachable, and was always a great advocate for us.
Sure, it's approachable if you share his birthday. I'm sure.
Exactly.
You've
but he
aged
was always
way better than him.
Well, thank you. So Leonard, no matter where he goes, Rotten Tomatoes will pick up those reviews. Now, the other one is the outlet level, right? So the joke I always used is any review coming from the New York Times, the paper of record, those reviews will go in, right? The New York Times decides tomorrow they're going to hire a 12-year-old girl to write reviews. It was basically, well, that's what we figured those editors know what they're doing, right? Which is a little bit of passing the buck, but it becomes somewhat overwhelming to be the one to make the judge, to make the judgment on every individual critic. It's because you open up a can of worms that you're never going to make anybody happy. So a little bit becomes, well, look, when we came up with the criteria, we're looking up either for these giant outlets or somebody, if you want the individual approval, you have to have been working at one of these outlets for 8 or 9 years.
And
right?
that just automatically led to this sort of demographic
so what that meant was
cheat toward older white men.
What we were doing, we would actively go and look for critics, but we also said, if you want to apply, here's what we're looking for. And we also said, but we reserve the right to add people that don't meet these criteria based on quality of writing. And what we discovered was dudes would ask, for the most part, 9 times out of 10, a guy who's close, a male writer who was close to those criteria would say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot anyway. And most of the time, they'd be a good enough writer that would say, sure, right? You're 6 months shy, right? You're a little bit short, but you've got some really good points. We think your writing is great. Fine. Women that would apply, we would do that same thing to, but we saw so many more men apply because the Western society gender roles are, and I know this from having managed both men and women, and I'm painting in very, very, very broad strokes here, women don't ask for things. If there's some barrier that says you don't automatically qualify. And so that was part of what led to we had more men applying than women. And so the other thing too is, you look at the high-level executives and experience, and I mean, look at the people making movies. Look at the people who are greenlighting movies. Look at the people who are almost filling all mid-range to upper-range jobs. It's the country as a whole, right? Like it's overwhelmingly established white dudes. And so where that's...
You're saying even in this world of cutting-edge technology and this website, Rotten Tomatoes, you're saying the overall culture, which has reflected male dominance, even there, it washes in.
It was a bias that we didn't realize we had, right? And it was because we weren't. And so once that came on our radar, it's like, oh my God, how do we fix this?
And
right?
So you face the same institutional issues on this problem that a lot of other places have.
And look, like it wasn't intentional. When that news broke, our reaction internally was, oh no, what have we done? Like, ugh.
So did you then start inviting people?
We did. But it's not like there were
chicks welcome. Did you put that
right?
up? No?
Ladies' night at the
ladies
in free.
But there had to be a population of women just below the threshold who weren't asking because they were just below the threshold.
There were some, but it's not like there's 700 female critics out there that suddenly need to be added. Here's the other thing that happens online, right? Because there were a lot of men came in. The opportunity cost for women reviewing movies is so much higher than it is for men. Over and above the fact that, look, again, 9 times out of 10, they're making less money, right? But a woman reviews a movie and a man reviews a movie, especially like a comic book movie or a sci-fi movie.
The man doesn't get as many death threats.
Right. Or if the dude does, like, it's a different level, right? A woman will get death threats, she'll get doxxed. I mean, look, those damn Star Wars fans ran Kelly Marie Tran off of Instagram because they were so awful. Just because she happened to be an Asian woman in the movie.
Who saved the black stormtrooper they hated.
Right, exactly. So, you can imagine, I mean, I've watched it happen. Christy Lemire, right, who I do What the Flick with, we shut the comments down on Rotten Tomatoes for the second Batman movie because she and somebody else were getting death threats because they didn't like it. And it was like, okay, everybody out of the pool.
All right.
Right? This is why we can't have nice things. And in my column that I put up as to why we were doing it, I wrote, that was the headline. This is why we can't have nice things. So, what that means is it's a harder long-term viable career for women, I think, in a lot of cases than it is for men. Because, look, not only is that online misogyny happening, that happens within the community, right? I mean, it happens within the film community.
Right.
People who are colleagues that you can get harassed by that you can't just go to HR because they work at a different company, right? So that's, it's the death by a thousand cuts. There's all these little pieces that go into, especially around film reviews and film coverage that have run some women out of the business.
Notwithstanding the demographic bias, Rotten Tomatoes continues to be fairly representative of public opinion, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think ultimately critics and audiences match up more than people would like, more than the studios would like to have you believe, right? The way to look at this, a guy at Slate named Eric Lundegard ran this great study 7 or 8 years ago, and he'll revisit it from time to time, that says that the per screen averages tend to be higher for well-reviewed movies, right? And critics tend to match up with audience word of mouth. And a good movie gets a good buzz, right? Now, if you have a movie that critics hate and has a really high audience score, wait 6 or 7 months to check that audience score. You can't trust the audience score the first weekend. Also, there's no proof that an audience score is representative of people who actually saw a movie, right?
Oh, that's weird. So you're saying,
yeah.
people,
Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, everybody who's got a quote-unquote audience score, anybody with a computer can rate a movie, whether or not they've seen it. And at least we assumed critics saw a movie, right? But the audience score, so every time somebody's like, well, the audience score for Batman v Superman was 90%. I'm like, sure, it was 90% the day it opened, right? We had 20,000 reviews up from the audience
from people who wanted
the day before it opened. They didn't screen that movie to 20,000 audience members.
That also seems like a place where big money studio marketing could, if they felt it valuable enough, influence what that audience score is.
Oh, totally. Totally. I mean, there are people that, you can see, especially when somebody has never reviewed a movie before and they start going on a site like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb and voting a movie up. I'm like, oh, yeah, somebody motivated their staff to go do that, right? I always was tempted to let's run some IP addresses and see where that's coming from.
Right. But that's the thing about Rotten Tomatoes is that there is sort of a little bit of an electronic trail, so you can follow somebody back and see what other reviews they have. So the one-offs to just juice a movie are pretty transparent.
For the audience score, sure. Look, if you're using audience scores, I think an audience score a lot of times, at least in the first couple of weeks, is a measure of fan
enthusiasm
and investment, right? But if you wait 6 or 8 months to that people have seen things on the kind of DVD window, and especially if you were to take out all those initial reviews, it's going to be a lot closer to how the critics respond. And the thing with something like Batman v Superman, the second weekend for that movie was one of the largest drops you'd ever seen for a movie. It was like a 65% drop in the box office because word gets out.
Right. And even the hardcores don't want to see it a third time.
Right.
Yeah. So when you're at Rotten Tomatoes and this thing is blowing up, it's really blowing up. What then are your challenges to make it blow up more and to get a bigger acquisition and to grow the brand?
It was more about trying to keep the brand going as we were going to these different areas that didn't really know what to do with it. My big fight with the Flickster leadership was that they wanted to add audience reviews as part of the official number. And that was a huge, huge fight to keep that from happening.
So to be fair, that there's a purity to this. You're saying, look, at some point, if you do something like that,
that is jobbable.
Right, you've undercut the value of this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because somebody will figure out a way to juice it. Look, do I know how you could manipulate a score based on a screening strategy? Sure, right? If I ever wanted to get into the consulting business, I could totally walk a studio through how to get 5 or 10 more points on the tomato meter, right? With legit critics, because I know how early reviews parse out to later reviews.
Well, give us an example of that.
He's going to sell that intellectual
Yeah,
property.
Okay,
exactly.
all right, never mind that.
No, but look, like, one way to look at this is that there will be, this plays the opposite way, but a movie will screen at a festival. And Alonzo Duralde calls this the Sundance effect. Somebody will get really excited, use a smallish group of critics, say 30 or 40, will see a movie at Sundance and they'll love it. And then by the time 6 months later it gets to theaters that everybody else in the country, all the other critics get to see, they're like, you guys like this that much? Really? Like that? Because you go in with good expectations, right? And
just the vibe at a big festival like that, you're saying, is so exciting.
You're rooting for a movie at a festival. You're not rooting for it in a theater.
Right. And Alonzo also says, the air's thin up there and you're half drunk anyway. And so, and then so sometimes the expectations can get really high. And then when you finally get to it, a lot of people were saying that about both audiences and some critics were like that with Get Out. Right, the first couple of weeks at Get Out, everybody's raving. Oh my God, this movie! Yeah. And then a month or two in, you had some people like, I know, it was good, right?
Right.
And and on a certain level, people, a movie like Get Out's a good example. I guarantee you, there's critics that would be reluctant to be the first one to say, oh, this movie doesn't work, right? It's almost like. Because you'll get the blowback in the wrong way, right? You'll get the blowback.
It's not worth it.
What do you mean? You don't like if you can be on the fence a movie. Look, I will say from my own experience, I could be on the fence about a movie that everybody loves, and a movie like Get Out is loaded with political overtones.
Right.
So you're going to get people labeling you a racist, right or not, if you were the first negative review for that movie.
Right.
Right. So some people want to be like, maybe I'll hold off on that.
Right.
That's a great point. By the way, did you feel that movie was too celebrated? Because on the
I don't think it was. I think it was.
I thought it was pretty good. Yeah.
Celebrated.
Yeah, I thought it was a really well made, and it held to the conventions of the genre, which I always respect. Like I respected Book of Mormon because it was like, no, you can't pick it apart for not being a real musical.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that Peele does in that movie is it's what Edgar Wright does really well with his first couple of movies is that he's spoofing a genre and still making an effective movie within that genre. Right. Hot Fuzz is a great example of that. Hot Fuzz spoofs almost every trope in the buddy cop movie, but Edgar Wright makes this really effective buddy cop action comedy. Right. While spoofing the whole concept.
Right. Without stopping the movie for his jokes.
Yeah.
Even as Rotten Tomatoes continued soaring, you decided to jump from Rotten Tomatoes to this other online. Are we done? I want to make sure I mind the Rotten Tomatoes.
We added TV because we had to get into. I mean, how could you not at this point? Like you had to because the audience. That was a big push to add TV reviews to Rotten Tomatoes because it was only movies for a long time.
Was it harder to find online TV reviewers? It feels as though that is sort of an orphaned.
No, I don't think so. Except that TV. There's two different tiers of the way people write about TV. One is the standard kind of review of shows that are premiering, and it functions like a movie review. Like, should you take a chance on this show or not? Right? If you look, and you'll see those reviews that come out in the trades. But then you've got people who are doing recaps, which in many cases do function like reviews. They're calling out what works and what doesn't work in a show. If you read recaps of Westworld, a lot of them are both positive and negative, but people are sticking with the show. However, so on some shows, Rotten Tomatoes is doing individual episode level scores for the shows that people are following. Game of Thrones is another one.
And they're aggregating recappers?
And they're aggregating recappers when the recappers are adding kind of qualitative analysis and review
not just
within what's going on. Right. However, those tend to tilt towards being positive because if you're really hating a show, you drop out.
Right, unless you're assigned by a publication.
Unless you're assigned, right? But otherwise you drop out.
Who owns Rotten Tomatoes now?
Right now it's NBC, Universal, Comcast. Oh, yeah. The other thing I should mention about Rotten Tomatoes is this is the thing that always kills me. First of all, I go into interviews, people like, you hate us. I'm like, it's not me. It's the critics. It's great plausible deniability. But I would hear people, you see this comment all the time that critics hate film. They hate movies. And I always think like, man, that's so wrong. Right. You'd have to be some kind of masochist to have a job where your job is watching movies. It's that critics love film and they know what it could be. And so when you see somebody, they harsh on Adam Sandler movies all the time because Adam Sandler made the mistake of doing a really, really good movie called Punch Drunk Love. And so they all know what he's capable of doing. And so for him to just do these easy layups, like, sure, great, you've found another studio to finance your vacation. Good job. But we're not going to act like it's good.
Well, and everyone has their own sense of journalism too about what how do there's I think some critics fairly, which is probably the most fair thing, which is this movie had X objective, it accomplished X objective, therefore it's a decent movie. It's
right. Ebert always talked about that. Is that you can't necessarily he might call some goofy action movie 4 stars, and is he saying that movie is the equivalent of The Godfather? No, it's that movie does what it sets out to do. Right.
Because that's what because once it's greenlit, that's all you can really judge people on, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I saw Skyscraper last night.
Yeah.
And it's stupid with 2 O's. Stupid, but I loved it.
Oh,
right?
really?
Sure. Oh, yeah, it's hilarious. I mean, it's great. It's totally over the top, totally dumb, totally functions.
Totally self-aware, though.
It's not so much that it takes you out of the movie, but it's The Rock versus a skyscraper.
Winky.
Yeah, but
right,
but
and
it
he's
was
missing
The Rock,
a leg, so it's a fair fight.
It was The Rock versus The World when it was Earthquake or whatever he did.
San Andreas.
I
like this one better than San Andreas.
Yeah. Oh, you like San Andreas?
San Andreas is fine. No, actually, the one that The Rock has done in the last few months that I really liked was Jumanji.
Yeah, I just
thought
saw that the other
Jumanji
night
was
on
terrific.
cable. It was very good. Jake Kasdan directed that, who was a Freaks and Geeks guy with me.
Oh, yeah. Josh is on Freaks and Geeks, writer, producer on Freaks and
He
Geeks.
directed both my apps.
That's wild to hear because it just had the same feel as San Andreas. I mean, like, I'm talking about from a trailer standpoint. You look at the trailer.
Yeah, big disaster movie. But it does exactly what it says on the box. No surprises. You go in there and like, oh, yeah, all right.
Is there a villain besides the fire?
Sort of.
Oh, there's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, there is
has to
kind
be.
of.
Yeah.
Right, but it's not the level of like Hans Gruber.
It's
and
not.
Die Hard, right? Like that's a good villain.
So my question is like, how does Hollywood behave differently? Because I assume that there's like a lot more embargoes of reviews.
So
now. I assume there's a lot like you can't review it. Period.
Yeah, so one of the things was, so I know that a lot of directors and a lot of executives are watching the reviews come in because they would on a Wednesday or Thursday. We would start getting calls from the publicists saying, hey, do you have this review up? It'd be one of 2 things. We'd either get sent a big list of reviews that typically the publicist got sent from their director for that film, a big list of positive. Ironically, they never would send us negative reviews. Or you'd get somebody who'd say, hey, you have this review marked negative and we think it should be positive, right? And again, never saying the other way. Never like, you mark that.
Right.
No. So they do that and we'd always check with the critic. And we'd always say, hey, did we mark this one right? But I know that there was a lot of that, like a lot of like paying attention to that kind of thing. Where I really noticed how much they started to embrace it is when they started including the certified fresh badging
Like
in
on the second.
Well, or we started seeing it on home video releases, and then you started seeing it. I remember being very, very excited for one of the X-Men TV spots where they popped the badge and you heard the announcer saying certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. That was really cool.
I mean, that is, what you dream of. You dream of building this thing to the point that it's that relevant, that in the business that you're, in this case, built to critique and built to... And by the way, I can make an argument that Rotten Tomatoes actually help drive movie business. I mean, it's not...
I think so.
Yeah, so the idea somehow that it's ruining movie business, which you hear, I think that's an old school argument.
Right. Look, I always tell people, if there's a movie you're excited to go see that movie, right? But if you're on the fence, Rotten Tomatoes is a great data point to help you make that decision. Or if you're really getting into movies and you really want to understand how the language of film works and you have a reaction, go and read the reviews that are opposite to the way you feel. Because then what are you missing? What are the alternate takes on that? And that's where I think as a kind of information sharing platform, it could be really valuable.
Yeah, I use it as a gateway to get to specific reviewers. I use it as a portal to go, okay, there's like 3 or 4 reviewers who I think are either good writers or I trust their opinion so much.
Yeah, and the thing
I
that
sometimes will go after I've seen the movie.
And I think the thing that Rotten Tomatoes can really help do is it can help it really helps with the platform releases, the movies that would otherwise be off the radar.
Right.
And, so I think, for instance, I don't think A Quiet Place would have done the business it did without all of the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, or look, even Metacritic, somebody else. Like, the critical acclaim around a movie can help get it in front of an audience. That, as somebody who reviews movie, that's my favorite thing to be able to do, is turn someone on to a movie that they otherwise wouldn't have heard of.
And that's the other modern thing you get on your side then, is FOMO. Fear of missing out happens when a discovery happens. Everyone wants to be a part of a discovery because they need something to stoke their feed with.
But you were asking about like getting it bigger. I was about a year at Rotten Tomatoes, and Ebert had been getting sicker and sicker. And this was before he'd had the second surgery where he'd lost his jaw. And we knew that he was slowing down. And then he went into surgery and came back and had kind of stopped writing and then started writing again. And I said to my boss, look, 2 Thumbs Up is going to be going away, and there's going to be a void there. And we could have the certified fresh thing be the equivalent of 2 Thumbs Up. And so for the next 3 or 4 years, my team and I, every decision we'd make about day-to-day interacting with critics and things that we would do and stories we'd publish, like, is this going to, at worst, keep us from getting there? Like, is this going to keep us from getting there? Is this going to stand in the way, or is this move us toward that goal? So when salespeople would, because the sales team would always be trying to sell advertising to the studios, somebody would always get this bright idea, like, let's do a thing about movies that audiences love and critics hate, right? And I always would say, no, we're not going to do that, because that's a relatively harmless piece, and that's an interesting piece, and you'll get a lot of traffic. But I didn't think it served Rotten Tomatoes to question the authority on quality that critics represent, right? And so that was a subtle decision, but that helped get to, that's why certified fresh means something.
That was good strategy.
Thank you.
Yes, it really was. And I wouldn't even take a meeting on that idea. I mean, it just runs down the whole, philosophy of the entire play. In looking at the reviews, you can do like a deep dive on Rotten Tomatoes. That's what I find the short reviews. And I used to love reading the long reviews, and still do enjoy reading the long reviews. There's some of the best writing, I think, is in film criticism. But the thing about Rotten Tomatoes is it does sort of do a reducto on things, so you're just looking at little capsules.
It does. I think for the most part, I don't think we've moved people away from reading full reviews, or at least not more than the rest of modern media has done.
Reading the full anything.
Right, the full anything.
Yeah.
Our hope was that we were, if anything, reaching an audience that otherwise wasn't really paying attention to reviews at all. Because I think if you're really interested in reviews, you're going to go seek them out. And if anything, we were making it easier for people to find reviews.
That's how, like I said, that's how I use it, is to get as a link just to find all the good writers in one spot.
And that's how I see it. I think you're exactly right. People who otherwise wouldn't even be paying attention to movie critics now see movie critics, and some of them may click through to actually read longer reviews or certainly be more curious about movies. I see it as a net win, a huge net win for the movie business. But I also see, if you're Martin Scorsese or whomever, you kind of just you're coming from a place of film history and film culture that just probably is reluctant to embrace this.
Well, go ahead.
It's a new thing to blame.
Yeah, right.
For your sucky movie.
But again, it's not like there was this heyday where, people would gather and watch Pauline Kael and Andrew Sarris debate movies in New York. Like, that just didn't happen. I mean, sure, there might have been, Scorsese is a New York guy, and he might have been one of the 300 people that followed that back in the day. But that's one guy, right? And that's a guy who is he's immersed in film.
The story.
And his hobby is film preservation, let's be clear, right? But that's not the average person. I mean, the average American still, at this day, goes and sees 5 movies in the theaters a year. That's it. That's nothing.
God,
right?
that's wild.
That's crazy, right? And there's so many,
And how many films of those is the average person being dragged to by their kids and family?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And that's, to your point, Josh, about FOMO, like, I think part of what happened with Han Solo not doing well a few months back was that the audience as a whole got hit with 3 or 4 must-see movies, all within a 6-month span, right? At Christmas, we had a Star Wars movie, and then there was Black Panther, and then there was Wrinkle in Time, which was a little bit of a disappointment, and then, you know, an Avengers movie coming up, and Deadpool, and so you can't do a layup like Han Solo and be a must-see. Like, at that point, you followed at least 2, if not 3 must-see movies, right? The 2 must-see movies absolutely were Last Jedi and Black Panther. And I'm not saying anything about the quality. I thought both those movies were great, but those were events.
And the Avengers one.
And the Avengers, right? And so you get to Han Solo and you're like, and when people are coming back from that saying, it's okay, right?
It's like a reprieve.
It's like a reprieve, like, oh, good, I don't have to get out. Because if you watch the box office take, it spikes on Friday and not on Saturday. Like, it starts to drop off on Saturday, right? Which is unusual because typically the numbers really spike on a Saturday, but it starts to drop off, and by Sunday it's really, really dropped.
Wow, so that word got out quickly.
It did. Right, because again, it wasn't even about the Rotten Tomatoes. It was people go and see it, and the word gets out like, oh, I saw it.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Yeah, wait for it.
People aren't going to be talking about this for weeks, and therefore you don't have to be conversant in it.
But you just bring up something which is important. The return of the Marvel universe and the superhero tentpole film, there is then a fatigue, you're saying, about all this. Or at least they have to be strategic about when they open these movies.
Well, I think I don't know that there, you know, a lot of people will say that there's superhero fatigue. I don't agree. I think there's blockbuster fatigue, right? I think I think there's mediocre blockbuster fatigue. I don't think there's superhero fatigue as such. I think that when people are complaining about superhero fatigue, I think they're mostly complaining about either the Fox set of Marvel movies, the X-Men movies, which are not part of the Disney classic kind of Marvel cinematic, that's a separate shared universe, or they're talking about the awful stuff that Warner Brothers is putting out, aside from Wonder Woman, which was at least a decent movie. I think that what Kevin Feige's done over at Marvel is he's made, you know, I'll back up a bit. One of the things I think about is the convergence of movies and television. And at some point, you know, what's the difference, right? Feige's not making a series of movies. Feige's making a TV show. There's a TV show called the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he is the showrunner. He functions just like Vince Gilligan does on Breaking Bad, right? And he might have writers and directors come in on individual things, but there is a house style, and they are telling an overarching story. And so when that latest Avengers comes out, you have to go because you've at least caught some of those movies. And it's like the big episode of Game of Thrones that moves the plot forward. Right. And Ant-Man doesn't do quite as big because it's a bottle episode and it's a side story. And that's okay, right? They know that. But our next 2 episodes we're going to get in that big story are going to be Captain Marvel and then the second Avengers or this next Avengers movie, right? It's a TV show. Whereas Warner Brothers hasn't put that work in because Feige's been putting that story together for 10 years, right? They got his characters were invested. We got 2 or 3 Iron Man movies and Captain America movies and Thor movies, and we're all invested in these characters in a way that we're not with the way we don't see with the X-Men movies quite the same.
Right.
And tell everybody Feige's story, how he got to this place where he has created this superhero journey.
I mean, what's fascinating when you look at that is that Marvel had such a troubled history making it to the big screen for so long. You know, they in the 80s, and you know, there's that terrible ashcan version of Fantastic Four, which it's hard to find, but it's the one that got made just so somebody could hang on to the rights of it. Right. And Marvel, as they got bought by Toy Biz and went through all these bankruptcies, they were selling off IP rights to make movies to all these different studios. And they sold their best characters, arguably their most iconic characters, to Fox and Sony. Sony got Spider-Man, and Fox got Fantastic Four and the X-Men. And the X-Men, that was a great movie. Fantastic Four, they kept dropping the ball on. And Paramount was kind of the one that was like, oh, all right, we'll do a Thor movie and we'll try a Hulk movie. And so they had all these little pieces that when Disney bought Marvel, like the Avengers story were these, you know, at that point, Thor and Iron Man and Captain America, those were all like second tier Marvel characters, right? I mean, that'd be the equivalent of like going and saying, okay, I'm going to do, it's hard to think of because there's all these TV shows with the Warner Brothers characters, but you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to make a Green Arrow movie. People are like, who's Green Arrow, right? But they managed to, you know, kind of take these second tier characters and turn them into like the A-team. Right. I mean, they're definitely A-listers now. Like that's the core. Whereas for years in the 80s, the X-Men titles and the Fantastic Four, like X-Men and Spider-Man, like those were the big titles that Marvel was selling in comic shops. Those were the hot IPs.
How much do you think? I mean, clearly, you know, the Iron Man movie set the tone for all that. How much do you think was Favreau, and how much do you think was Feige in that tone setting?
I think it's a couple. I think it's a. You know, this is where movies can really, as a collaborative art, can be amazing, right? Like you've got, I think Feige was finding, you know, Favreau had done a big budget, like he'd done Zathura, and so he could do big budget set pieces, but he could still do interesting character stories, and really a lot of it is Downey, right? Like Downey, you know, knowing, you know, once you dig into the character of Tony Stark, and you're like, oh, Downey, that's perfect, right? That's absolutely a perfect casting. Because at the time, both Feige and Favreau were fighting for Downey. The studio didn't want to have him. They're like, oh no, he's not. He's too much of a risk, right? Like that's before that.
Right, he was still coming out of that personal problem period.
Right, and you know that they got someone who has that charisma and could make that character his own. And you know, I remember coming out of that movie like, oh my god, they made a movie out of this. This is amazing. Because it was this great one character movie and it really worked. And it wasn't about, I mean, not one character. I mean, one character like, as opposed to a team X-Men movie. It's like they made a really solid movie where you cared about these characters and hinted at another one. And they kept doing that. And, you know, it helps that Feige's a fan of those characters and loves those characters and keeps them consistent enough that you're invested in them. So by the time you get to Civil War, right, and you have this end of the movie where it's a fight that happens between Captain America and Iron Man, is because Steve Rogers knew that his best friend Bucky had killed Tony Stark's parents and didn't tell him. And you're invested at that point. If you've seen all those movies for the last few years, like I think of it as like Greek tragedy almost, right? Like I had this feeling like when.
Luckily, they don't, like DC does.
No,
DC makes films like it's Greek tragedy.
Right. But I guess like what I'm saying is I'm sitting in that movie thinking when you get to that moment where Tony Stark realizes that Steve Rogers knew how Stark's parents had died, I was like, oh no, that's going to ruin their relationship. And I was like, and I was really invested, right? Like in a way that
that's what they want.
That's what they want, right? That's a way that I don't know that you get. Your typical action movie doesn't get you there. And so part of what Feige's been able to do is get you really, really invested in these characters, right? And that they mean something. Now, the trick is, I don't know that you can sustain that for 20 years and keep, right? I mean, one of the knocks on comics is that you have to keep resetting back to normal, right? And that may work in the comics, but because you're churning new audiences, but I don't know that that's the way to do a successful. I don't know that you have that same impact in movies.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch this whole series sort of grow old, if it can do that.
If it hasn't.
If it hasn't. You went to the Young Turks network, the TYT network, and then your challenge immediately was to build, and we'll wrap up here in a second, but I just want to spend a moment at the Young Turks, because that's where What the Flick is, so you can see it on the TYT network, and you guys talk about movies and television and all these other things, and then when you're not doing that, you're working on programming for that network, and it's expanding rapidly. I mean, this is the largest online news network in the world, and now it's going to be on YouTube television, is on YouTube television.
It is on YouTube television. We're trying to get on other carriers in negotiations, and you know, it's trying to also build the business just on straight up YouTube and Facebook and everywhere else. It's, you know, my pitch to Cenk was, look, my team and I over at Rotten Tomatoes turned that into a household name. So after the election, I went to Cenk. I was like, look, I'm not happy about this. I'm not the political expert you are, but I can help you tell a larger story and have these larger narratives take place in the media to hopefully have an election not happen like this again. Because part of how we got Rotten Tomatoes where it was learning how to use the media to tell our story, right?
Sure.
Like being able to, we spent a lot of time sharing like we would do newsletters to other outlets like, hey, here's the tomato meter scores. Hey, we did that for a year before anyone started really actually picking it up, right? But then it starts to feed on itself like, oh, those guys are talking about it. Well, we should talk about it.
And we can count on them to deliver this every week.
Right. And so, using some of those ideas, I mean, we were basically writing a column for the Wall Street Journal's Vulture blog for a while, right? Like, here's the review roundup of the week. And so what I'm working on with the team at TYT is how can we have the stories we tell or the things we say get picked up in other places in the media and hit the audience that way with the brand attached.
It's it's funny because I'm so tuned into that world, so it's hard for me to really have a legitimate perspective on this. It seems to me that that's happening more, but I don't know whether it is really or not.
I think it is somewhat,
but it's not where you want it yet.
It takes a while, right? Because you do a lot of the effort where you don't see the immediate pickup, and then there's a tipping point where it starts to self-sustain. I don't think it's self-sustaining yet, but it starts to, right? Where you want to get is where you have to, ideally, I want to get to a point where people in the media will look at what the Young Turks are doing to say, okay, Trump's new, for instance, Trump's new nomination for the Supreme Court. I want to see what Cenk and Anna have to say about that. I want to get to the point where media figures are looking to see what Cenk and Anna are saying about that, because that will help TYT reach their audiences. Like, that's the bridging point, right?
And Cenk has, and Anna as well, shown up on mainstream media outlets more.
Yeah. And so, when you hear about, it's similar to, you may hear about what, what's his name on HBO?
Bill Maher.
Bill Maher. You may hear about what Maher is saying on a particular topic, right? And if you hear enough, if there's enough coverage of the way Maher talks about something, if you're inclined to agree with that, you'll start checking them out yourself and not waiting for the secondary information. And so that's what I'm hoping to get to.
Did you see that, speaking of Maher, that HBO is, because now with the AT&T acquisition, HBO is going to be called upon to build a subscriber base that's much bigger than the one that they have.
Right. That's going to be crazy.
Yeah, otherwise the HBO may not be what it is now in another few years.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that...
They've always had prestige, right?
Right, they've
and
had
great
prestige.
Shows.
And HBO can spend the money on the shows that they've been able to do because of the margins they get, right? They're not, unlike a broadcast outlet who has to solely subscribe on or solely survive on ad space. They're getting money direct from their consumers. I on the face of it, just looking at the initial coverage, I think it's short-sighted for AT&T to suddenly say, I don't know, you got to triple your subscriber base. Like, by the same token, Netflix is doing that, but HBO has a different platform. HBO isn't serving everything on demand the way Netflix does. Now, if HBO can make that pivot relatively quickly, they're close to that level of infrastructure with their apps and their online offering. They could do that.
Yeah, I would wonder. I wonder what the cable versus HBO Go ratio is right now.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Right.
HBO Now and HBO Go, the on-demand part of HBO, they're trying to build that out.
They could. I mean, look, Netflix has only been doing original content for 6 years.
Right.
6 years, right? Lillehammer was the first one they did.
$1 trillion.
Right. They've got something like 60 or 70 theatrical length, like feature length movies coming out, and I think over 200 series that they're doing. Now, the advantage that Netflix has, and I don't know if HBO has this infrastructure yet. Netflix can use their numbers, and they've been doing this for years, to figure out what people want to watch, right? I mean, that's the story about how House of Cards came out. Like, all right, people like politics, and they like Kevin Spacey, and they like dramas. Okay, let's do a political drama with Kevin Spacey called House of Cards.
Well, that's like every big conglomerate like this operates on two levels, where there's the programming side and then there's the data mining side. Right. And that data is more valuable than the programming.
And what's great about Netflix is that they figured out how to do that and do it mostly pretty well.
Right, that's the thing. You have to marry that data
secretly.
You have to marry the data with creatives that can really make it work and execute.
And they're willing to pay for it.
That's the thing, is they find those creatives and make them offers.
I mean, as is right. I mean, look at Amazon stealing. Who stole Shonda Rhimes? Was that Netflix or Amazon?
Netflix. I believe.
Yeah, I mean, they're throwing stupid money at these creators. Yeah. Or not stupid, actually. They're throwing the money that those creators probably should be getting to generate the revenue that they're capable of getting that the networks can't compete with anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you the job I would
No, when you
not
spend
want.
$20 million for a stand-up special, that's when you go, really?
I'll tell you the job that I would not want. I would not want to be a broadcast programming executive in the last 5 years.
That's why they need to do. They're going to have to change that model also because they've got to compete, and they are.
Why would you
they
want
are
to be
competing.
a creative going to broadcast?
Well,
right
and
now?
you got to figure. But the thing is, the X factor and the death knell there though is how many of these old guard media companies still have enough pull in Washington to keep things a certain way before that business dries up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when people talk about like, oh, the movie business is dead, it's like, don't tell that to the exhibitors yet because they're still tied to this old model.
And even that's changing, though. That the way you're seeing a movie in the theater is changing, right? The kinds of theaters, the theater experience is going to change.
It's going to have
continues to change,
right?
yeah.
I mean, the worst thing happening for the theater owners is that everybody's got these big screens at home, right? And there's really good streaming content, so now they got to really compete.
But there's also a community quality about seeing these. That's why these other big movies are coming. Do you remember what you said? This is you on Ant-Man. As much as the jokes are funny and mostly work, it starts to get in the way of the drama, or at least the emotional heft, and that's why they're, and that's what they're trying to go for in this, what is ultimately a rescue story. He said,
Yeah, I mean, it's a good, it's fun. It's
"Yeah,
fun.
it looks like you were so on it."
Yeah,
like,
I was.
okay.
Look, my take on it with the Marvel movies is I've been spoiled by a couple of really, really good ones, right?
Sure.
Like the last 3 Marvel movies in that shared universe, Thor and Black Panther and Avengers are just knockouts, right? And so when you do this one that's like, okay, right, like a B movie, it's a B plus, but it's only a B
But it's
plus.
perfunctory.
But I know you guys can, like, you just hit me with 3 A pluses. So a B, I'm like, you can
Yeah,
do
that's
better.
the problem. The level is set too high.
I'm like that terrible parent, like, you only got a B? Come on.
You're not applying yourself. Matt Atchity, thank you for hanging out with us for a little
thank
while.
you.
I love that whole Rotten Tomatoes journey, and now to the Young Turks. I hope you bring a lot of that magic dust to that place.
I was I ruined the movie business. Now I'm going to ruin politics.
You can find Matt on What the Flick, which is on the TYT network. If you haven't checked out TYT, you really ought to do it. We got a lot of TYT listeners here, so I think there are probably a few are familiar with it. J. Elvis Weinstein, your documentary film, available on Amazon.
Amazon Prime, I Need You to Kill, it's called, and check out my podcast with Andy Kindler, Thought Spiral.
Love it. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is that dash?
Hope you liked our talk with Matt and enjoyed our chat with Michael Shure. Thank you for being here. Thanks for all the ways you support our show. And until next time, bye-bye.
I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? What's the matter with you? Go to Edge Show. Oh, shit, it's Edge dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. Show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is that dash?